Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Ross, for joining me, sharing your views on the subject. Moving on, Beijing has strongly criticized while responding to Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary's comments, accusing America of undermining China-Panama cooperation and resorting to bullying tactics. Listen into what China had to say.
美国的高级官员恶意攻击中国，抹黑破坏中巴合作，再次暴露了美国霸道霸凌的面目。中方对此表示坚决反对。谁想要控制巴拿马运河，世人皆知。美国应该自己照照镜子，看看究竟是谁在威胁他国的主权、安全与发展。
The U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has made a significant visit to Panama, marking the second highest level U.S. visit to the country since President Donald Trump took office. During his visit, Hegseth warned of ongoing threats to Panama, asserting that U.S. will not allow China or any other nation to compromise the waterway's integrity. Listen in to his comments.
Our relationship is growing in part to meet Communist China's rising challenge. China-based companies continue to control critical infrastructure in the canal area. That gives China the potential to conduct surveillance activities across Panama. This makes Panama and the United States less secure, less prosperous, and less sovereign. I want to be very clear. China did not build this canal. China does not operate this canal. And China will not weaponize this canal. We will do this in partnership with Panama. Together, we will take back the Panama Canal from China's influence.
The U.S. built the canal over a century ago but handed it over to Panama back in 1996. This diplomatic tension has heightened amidst concerns over China's influence in the region. There was discrepancy in the official statements released by both the American and Panama officials regarding sovereignty of the canal, with the U.S. version omitting a reference to Panama's inalienable sovereignty. Ross Feingold back on the telecast with me. Ross, how difficult is it going to be for America to rid Panama Canal of Chinese influence today?
Excuse me, the situation at the moment is a Hong Kong company controls a port on the Atlantic side and also controls a port on the Pacific side. Now, there was a recent auditor's report in Panama that questioned the legitimacy of the contract extension given to this Hong Kong company in 2021. So it's possible that under Panama legal procedures, the concessions might be removed, which would create a lot of interesting legal issues because the Hong Kong company would probably object and take legal action. At the same time, the Hong Kong company recently tried to sell the ports together with other ports it owns around the world to a U.S. asset manager, but the Chinese government has stepped in to block that sale for the moment. So a lot of these issues are really up in the air. But one thing that is definitely not up in the air is the Trump administration's view on this. As long as this Hong Kong company continues to control a port on the Pacific side and the Atlantic side of the Panama Canal, the United States is going to continue to make comments like we saw from Defense Secretary Hegseth or earlier from Secretary of State Rubio. The United States is going to continue to say to the Panamanians that China has too much influence over the canal. So until operation of those two ports reaches some kind of conclusion, the United States is going to take a very, very vocal view on this. And obviously China will object, and we'll have to see how the Panamanians react.
But having a look at what the Chinese policy has been with regards to salami slicing, we take a look at a number of countries, whether it is the Indian subcontinent, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan. We take a look at a number of Southeast Asian countries. We take a look at its aggressive policies against Taiwan and Japan. And then you have South America, and then you have Africa, where there have been ports and air bases that have been set up by China by design. And Panama Canal is no different. How again, the question about the influence of the Chinese is growing across the globe. How has it remained unchecked up until now, right under the noses of the American administration?
That's an excellent question. Very often, United States or American companies simply didn't want to do business in many of these locations. They didn't want to get involved with large infrastructure projects, which are incredibly complex. They're subject to wrongdoing, such as corruption. American companies generally cannot do overseas, although Trump has opened up the ability to do that with a recent. But generally speaking, American companies have avoided some of these projects, and Chinese companies that do large infrastructure projects are basically state-owned and working at the direction of the Chinese government, which made a strategic decision to do these kinds of infrastructure projects, whether that's ports, railways, industrial parks, bridges, highways, and they're willing to do it in places around the world, like in Africa, like in South Asia, like in Sri Lanka, as you mentioned, in Southeast Asia, and in Central and South America. And they were able to develop what they called the Belt and Road with a lot of infrastructure. Some of it involves heavy debt that these countries owe to China, and it's a policy that has worked for China for almost 10 years, but now there's greater appreciation of the risks. So we see lots of criticism from the United States and to a lesser extent from the European Union as well. But if they really want to combat this and get their own companies to invest in these projects, then there has to be a mindset change with the private sector from Europe and the United States, and they have to show more willingness to do these projects in the developing world.
Yeah, absolutely. But talking about how the locals are reacting, and the Panama Canal government and authorities are also speaking up against the resistance that they are showing about the American influence, which has been sudden after Trump administration taking over, and strongly undermining the very sovereignty and autonomy of Panama Canal. How is the American administration under Trump going to resolve this problem?
That's a very challenging problem to resolve because the United States has its policy priorities. They're not going to be shy about mentioning this. They're not going to be shy about telling Panama or other countries that we think you're subject to too much China. Countries, their leaders are proud people. They don't want to be lectured by the United States. They don't want the United States to tell them what to do. So it's a very tough balance to make between those competing issues, and that's why good diplomacy is so important.
Thank you for joining me, Ross. On that note, we come to the end of this